had never imagined that life could become so cruel. Just a few years ago, she had a husband who, though not wealthy, provided for their small family. They lived in a modest but comfortable home, had food on their table, and most importantly, their daughter Lucy was in school, with dreams of becoming a doctor one day. Her husband, Daniel, worked as a mechanic in a small garage on the outskirts of the city. He was a hardworking man who, despite earning just enough to get by, made sure his family never lacked the basics. Their life was simple, but filled with love. Mary, on the other hand, was a stay-at-home mother. She had never gone to college, never held a formal job, and relied entirely on Daniel's income. He often reassured her, saying, "I'll always take care of you and Lucy. You don't need to worry." But fate had other plans. One evening, Daniel left for work as usual, promising to be home by nightfall. He never made it back. A tragic road accident took his life, leaving Mary and Lucy shattered. Mary could still remember the cold hospital corridors, the doctor's solemn face as he delivered the news, and the weight of grief pressing down on her chest. At first, well-wishers and neighbors came with condolences and a little financial help. But as weeks passed, the sympathy faded and reality set in. Bills piled up. Rent was due. Lucy needed school fees. And Mary, who had no degree or work experience, found herself thrown into a world she was completely unprepared for. She tried everything. She knocked on doors, searching for any kind of work, cleaning, washing clothes, selling vegetables in the market, but nothing stable came her way. Most people wanted workers with experience, and some outright refused to hire a widow, as if her grief made her less capable. Days turned into weeks, and desperation grew. Eventually, when all other options failed, Mary turned to collecting plastic bottles and scrap materials from trash bins to sell for a few coins. It was dirty, degrading work, but it was the only way to keep her and Lucy from starving. Lucy, barely 10 years old, had to drop out of school. It broke Mary's heart to see her daughter, once full of dreams, now digging through trash piles with her. But they had no choice. "Mom, don't worry," Lucy would say, trying to smile. "One day we'll be fine again." But Mary wasn't so sure anymore. The small one-room house that Mary and Lucy called home was cramped, but shelter nonetheless. It had a thin mattress in one corner, a wooden stool, and a few worn-out cooking utensils stacked neatly in the tiny space that served as their kitchen. The walls were cracked, and the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. But Mary was grateful to have a place to sleep, a place that kept them off the streets, until one fateful day when everything changed. That morning, Mary had just returned from selling plastic bottles when she heard an argument outside. She peeked through the window and saw a tall, well-dressed man yelling at the caretaker. The man was furious, waving his hands in frustration. Mary didn't think much of it at first. Arguments happened all the time in their neighborhood. But when the caretaker pointed toward their door, a chill ran down her spine. A sharp knock followed. Mary hesitated, then opened the door. "Are you Mary?" the man asked, his voice rough with irritation. "Yes," she answered, glancing at Lucy, who stood behind her, gripping the hem of her dress. "I'm the landlord of this house," he announced. "I haven't received rent for months. You need to leave immediately." Mary's heart skipped a beat. "That's not possible, sir," she said quickly. "I've been paying rent every month to the caretaker. He collects it on your behalf." The landlord's eyes narrowed. "The caretaker says he never received a cent from you." Mary turned sharply to the caretaker, a short, beady-eyed man who now stood beside the landlord, arms crossed over his chest. "That's a lie," she cried. "You know I've been giving you the rent money every month. How can you do this?" The caretaker scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never received anything from you." Mary's hands trembled. "Please, sir, you have to believe me. He's lying." But the landlord had made up his mind. "I don't care who's lying. All I know is I haven't received my money, and I won't be cheated out of my property." He crossed his arms. "I want you out, now." Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. She had no proof, no receipts, nothing to show that she had been paying. She had trusted the caretaker blindly, never suspecting he would betray her like this. "Where will we go?" she pleaded, desperation in her voice. "That's not my problem," the landlord replied coldly. Mary turned to Lucy, who was clutching her arm tightly, confusion and fear written all over her young face. There was nothing more she could do. They had no money, no family to turn to, no one willing to take them in. With a heavy heart, Mary gathered their few belongings, a small bag of clothes, a blanket, and the little food they had left. As they stepped out of the house for the last time, Mary took one last look at the place that had sheltered them for years. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. The street stretched out before them, cold and unwelcoming. Mary wrapped an arm around Lucy as they walked away, homeless and uncertain of what the future held. Would they survive? Would they ever find a home again? Mary didn't have the answers, but for Lucy's sake, she had to keep moving. The night was colder than usual. Mary and Lucy sat on a torn piece of cardboard, huddled together under the dim glow of a streetlight. The shop they had chosen to sleep outside was closed for the night, its metal shutter pulled down tightly. Mary wrapped her arms around Lucy, rubbing her back to keep her warm. The little girl had barely spoken since they were thrown out of their home. "It's okay, my love," Mary whispered, placing a soft kiss on her daughter's forehead. "We'll figure something out." Lucy didn't respond. She simply curled up against her mother's chest, her small hands clutching Mary's tattered shawl. As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, the sound of footsteps startled Mary awake. A man's angry voice boomed above them. "Hey, get up, get out of here." Mary blinked, still groggy. A heavy-set man in a brown coat stood over them, glaring. The shop owner. "You think this is a hotel?" he scoffed. I don't want beggars sleeping in front of my shop. Leave before I call the police." Mary scrambled to her feet, pulling Lucy up with her. "Please, sir, I said leave." The man barked, raising a hand as if to strike. Mary grabbed their small bag and rushed away, Lucy's tiny hand in hers. They walked aimlessly for hours, hungry, exhausted, and unsure of where to go. By midday, they found themselves in a wealthy neighborhood where the roads were clean and the houses looked like palaces. The air smelled of fresh flowers instead of garbage. Lucy stared at the elegant gates and well-manicured lawns in amazement. "Mom," she whispered, pointing to a row of blue bins near one of the gates. "Maybe we can find bottles there." Mary hesitated, then nodded. She had no choice. They needed money for food, even if it meant searching through trash in front of houses that looked like they belonged to kings and queens. They approached one of the bins cautiously. As Mary bent down to pick up a plastic bottle, a deep, angry voice shattered the silence. "Thief, what do you think you're doing?" Mary turned to see a security guard storming toward them, his baton raised. He was a tall, burly man in a black uniform, his face twisted in disgust. I'm just collecting bottles," Mary stammered, stepping protectively in front of Lucy. The guard sneered. "Liar, you're here to steal, aren't you?" "No, sir, I swear." "I should call the police on you." He cut her off, looking her up and down. "People like you don't belong here." Tears pricked Mary's eyes. How had it come to this? Yesterday, she had a home. Today, she was being treated like a criminal for picking up trash. The guard continued shouting, drawing the attention of someone inside the house. The front door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was elegant, dressed in a simple but expensive dress, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her presence alone commanded attention. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The guard immediately straightened. "Madam Rose, I caught this woman snooping around. She says she's collecting bottles, but—" "I was, madam," Mary cut in before he could finish. "I wasn't stealing, I promise." Rose's eyes softened as she noticed Lucy standing behind her mother, clutching her arm tightly. She knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Lucy hesitated before answering. "Lucy." Rose smiled warmly. "A beautiful name." Then she turned to Mary. "Shouldn't she be in school?" Mary's throat tightened. I can't afford it anymore." A flicker of sadness crossed Rose's face. She stood up, looking between mother and daughter. "Come inside," she said. Mary's eyes widened in shock. "Inside?" "Yes," Rose said gently. "I think I can help." Mary hesitated. Could she trust this woman? But at that moment, she had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, she took Lucy's hand and followed Rose through the grand gates, leaving behind the cold, unforgiving streets. Mary sat on a plush leather couch in Rose's grand living room, still feeling out of place. The walls were adorned with elegant paintings, and the chandelier above them sparkled in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. She had never stepped foot in a house so magnificent before, and the contrast between this and the streets they had slept on just hours ago made her feel uneasy. Lucy sat beside her, staring in awe at everything around her. It was as if they had entered a different world. Rose handed Mary a warm cup of tea and sat across from her. "Tell me your story," she said gently. Mary hesitated, then sighed. "My husband passed away 2 years ago. We were never wealthy, but he made sure we had everything we needed. I was a stay-at-home mother, and when he died, I had no way to support myself and my daughter. I tried finding a job, but no one wanted to hire me without a degree. Eventually, I started collecting plastic bottles just to survive." Rose listened attentively, her expression soft with understanding. "My daughter had to drop out of school," Mary continued, her voice shaking. "I couldn't afford her fees anymore, and then the landlord threw us out. We had nowhere to go." Rose's heart ached. She had always lived a privileged life, but her husband, Michael, ran a charity foundation that helped the less fortunate. Listening to Mary's story, she realized how easily a person's life could fall apart. "Mary," Rose said with a warm smile, "how would you feel about working here?" Mary's eyes widened. "What?" "I need a housekeeper," Rose explained. "And I believe you need a job. You and Lucy can live here with us. You'll have a roof over your heads, food to eat, and a steady." Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. She had never expected such kindness from a stranger. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Rose said with a chuckle. Mary turned to Lucy, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "Mom, please say yes." With a trembling smile, Mary nodded. "Yes, thank you, madam. Thank you so much." That evening, when Rose's husband, Michael, returned home, he was surprised to find new faces at the dinner table. He listened quietly as Rose explained everything: their encounter, Mary's struggles, and her decision to hire Mary as a housekeeper. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "You should have consulted me first, Rose." "I knew you'd say that," she replied with a smirk. "But listen, she needs help, and we have the means to help her." Michael turned his gaze to Mary and Lucy. He saw the nervous way Mary held her daughter's hand, the way Lucy's eyes shone with hope. His heart softened. "I see," he said finally. He turned to Lucy. "Do you want to go back to school?" Lucy's face lit up. "Yes, sir, more than anything." Michael nodded. "Then it's settled. I'll enroll you in a good school." Mary gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. "Sir, you don't have to." "I want to," Michael interrupted. "You've been through enough. It's time someone gave you a chance." Mary wiped away the tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "Just do your job well," Michael said with a small smile. However, not everyone in the house was pleased with the new arrangement. Upstairs, Stacy, Rose and Michael's teenage daughter, sat fuming in her room. She had overheard everything. Unbelievable, she muttered. A poor maid and her daughter living here. Like they're one of us. She clenched her fists. She would not accept this, and she was determined to make their lives miserable. The first few days in Rose's home felt like a dream to Mary and Lucy. They had warm beds to sleep in, proper meals to eat, and most importantly, Lucy was back in school. Mary worked diligently as the new housekeeper, eager to prove her worth, while Lucy studied hard, determined to make the most of this second chance. But not everyone welcomed them. Stacy made it clear from the start that she despised their presence. Why do we have to live with beggars? She scoffed at dinner one evening, pushing her plate away. They don't belong here. Rose's fork clattered against her plate. Stacy, that's enough. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. Show some respect. Stacy folded her arms and rolled her eyes. I'm just saying the truth. We're rich, and they're them. Mary kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but Lucy clenched her fists under the table. She had never met someone so cruel before. The next day, while Mary was cleaning the kitchen, Stacy stormed in with a bundle of clothes and shoved them into Lucy's arms. Wash these. Lucy blinked. But there's a washing machine. I don't care, Stacy sneered. I want them washed by hand, and when you're done, iron them all. Lucy hesitated, but then nodded. Okay. If doing laundry would keep the peace, she'd do it. Hours later, Lucy was still scrubbing the clothes over a bucket of soapy water. Her fingers ached, but she didn't complain. Stacy stood nearby, watching with a smirk. Having fun, little maid, she mocked. I actually like washing clothes, Lucy said with a smile, trying to stay positive. Stacy scowled. She didn't want Lucy to enjoy it. She wanted her to suffer. Then iron them all twice, she snapped. Before Lucy could respond, Rose walked in. What is going on here? Stacy's smug expression faltered. Lucy, why are you washing clothes by hand when we have a washing machine? Rose demanded. Lucy hesitated, glancing at Stacy. She told me to, she admitted softly. Rose turned to her daughter, furious. Apologize, now. Stacy scoffed. It's just some washing. What's the big deal? The big deal is that you're treating Lucy like a servant, Rose snapped. I didn't raise you to be this way. Stacy glared at Lucy as if this were her fault. But she muttered, sorry, under her breath. Rose wasn't convinced. Mary, take these clothes and put them in the washing machine. And Stacy, if I ever catch you mistreating them again, you'll regret it. Stacy stomped away, seething, as if things couldn't get worse for her. Lucy began excelling in school. Every evening, she came home with perfect test scores, her teachers praising her intelligence. Rose and Michael congratulated her, buying her small gifts as encouragement. Stacy, on the other hand, struggled in school. She barely passed her tests and spent more time making excuses than studying. One day, Lucy saw her crying over a failed math test. She hesitated, but then sat beside her. "I can help you," Lucy offered gently. Stacy looked up, her eyes red with frustration. "Help me," she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "You, a charity case." Lucy flinched at the words. "You think just because you're good at school, you're better than me," Stacy snapped. "No, I just—" "Shut up," Stacy hissed. "I don't need your help. I don't need you. And I will never be your friend." Lucy felt tears sting her eyes. She had hoped they could get along, maybe even be like sisters. But Stacy made it clear she would never accept her. Lucy had endured Stacy's cruelty for as long as she could remember since moving into the house. No matter how hard she tried to stay positive, Stacy found new ways to humiliate her. But this time, it was too much. That evening, Lucy sat quietly at the dinner table, pushing her food around her plate. Stacy had spent the entire day making fun of her at school and calling her names at home. It wasn't just the insults anymore. It was the way she made Lucy feel like she didn't belong. "You're awfully quiet today," Michael noted. "She's probably thinking about how she doesn't deserve to be here," Stacy sneered. "Stacy," Rose warned. Stacy ignored her. "This isn't your home, you know. Just because my mom felt sorry for you doesn't mean you're one of us." Lucy's fork clattered against her plate. "Stop it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Stacy smirked. "Or what? Are you going to cry?" Lucy stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "Why do you hate me so much?" she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. "I've done nothing to you. I just wanted us to be sisters, but you're horrible." The room went silent. Stacy folded her arms. "Because you don't belong here." Lucy's vision blurred with tears. She couldn't take it anymore. Before anyone could react, she turned and bolted out the door. "Lucy," Mary cried, running after her. "Lucy, stop," Rose shouted. Michael followed close behind as Lucy sprinted out of the gate and down the street, her sobs muffled by the night air. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to get away. But in her panic, she didn't see the car speeding down the road. "Lucy, look out." Tires screeched as the driver swerved just in time. The car barely missed her, but Lucy tripped and fell onto the pavement. Mary and Rose reached her first, pulling her into a tight embrace. "My baby," Mary sobbed, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" Lucy shook her head, still trembling. Michael, breathing heavily from running, turned to Stacy, who had been watching from the doorstep. "Do you see what you've done?" he bellowed. Stacy shrank back, startled by his anger. "I've let you get away with this for too long," he continued. "You are a spoiled, selfish child, and I should have stopped this the moment it started." Stacy's shock turned to fury. "So you're taking their side?" Michael sighed, his voice weary. "This isn't about sides, Stacy. It's about right and wrong." But Stacy wasn't listening. She pointed an accusing finger at Mary and Lucy. "I want them gone. Right now." Rose's eyes widened in disbelief. "Stacy, you..." I don't care, Stacy shouted. This is my house, and I don't want them here. Silence hung in the air. Something inside Rose snapped. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the gate. Rose, wait, Michael called after her, but she didn't stop. She climbed into her car and sped down the road, her mind clouded with anger and frustration. How had her daughter become so cruel? How had Michael allowed this to happen? Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she blinked away angry tears. Then, a blaring horn, bright headlights, a sickening crash. Back at the house, they heard the impact. Michael's phone rang. When he answered, his face went pale. No, he whispered, shaking his head. Mary clutched Lucy tighter. Michael, what is it? His voice trembled. It's Rose. The house was no longer a home. It was filled with silence, sorrow, and an unbearable emptiness. Michael could barely function. He spent days in his room, looking at old pictures of Rose, listening to her voicemails, just to hear her voice again. The guilt consumed him. If only he had stopped the argument. If only he had gone after her. If only. Mary did her best to hold everything together. She took over the household duties while also comforting Lucy, who cried herself to sleep every night. But Stacy remained the same. She didn't shed a single tear at the funeral. She sat through the service with a cold, distant expression, ignoring the whispers of sympathy from relatives and family friends. And when it was over, she walked past Mary and Lucy as if they didn't exist. Days passed and nothing changed. Michael, despite his grief, had to leave for an important business trip. He packed his bags with a heavy heart, his movements sluggish. At the door, he hesitated, looking at Stacy. I don't want any trouble while I'm gone. Stacy rolled her eyes. Whatever. Michael sighed, then turned to Mary. Please, just make sure everything stays in order. Mary nodded. I will. He kissed Lucy's forehead, gave Mary a tired but grateful look, then left. The moment his car disappeared down the driveway, Stacy turned to them with a smirk. You heard him, she said. Time for things to go back to normal. Mary frowned. What do you mean? Stacy crossed her arms. I mean, it's time for you to leave. Lucy's eyes widened. What? You were only here because of my mom, and now she's gone. So get out. Michael won't allow this, Mary said firmly. Stacy laughed. He's not here, is he? Mary stared at her in disbelief. You can't do this, Stacy. We have nowhere to go. Stacy smirked. Not my problem. She grabbed a suitcase from the hallway and tossed it at Mary's feet. Pack your things. Lucy clutched her mother's arm. Mom, please. Mary's heart pounded. She had lost everything once before. Was she about to lose it all again? She looked at Stacy, hoping, praying for even the slightest hint of mercy. But there was none. Stacy's mind was made up, and there was nothing they could do. The next morning, Mary walked Lucy to school, her heart breaking with every step. She knew what she had to do. She sat in the principal's office, her hands trembling. I can't afford Lucy's school fees anymore, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I have no choice but to withdraw her. The principal, Mrs. Collins, frowned. Mary, Lucy is our brightest student. She has a future ahead of her. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. I know, but I won't let you take her out, Mrs. Collins interrupted firmly. Lucy deserves an education. She will stay here on a full scholarship. Mary gasped. A scholarship. Mrs. Collins smiled warmly. Yes, she's more than earned it. Mary covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, the principal said kindly. But I do have a job opening if you're interested. Mary's heart pounded. A job. Yes, we need a new secretary. It's not much, but it's stable, and it will help you get back on your feet. Tears streamed down Mary's face. This was more than she had ever hoped for. I'll take it, she whispered. For the first time in a long while, hope bloomed in Mary's heart. Their new beginning had finally begun. Michael stepped into the house, exhausted from his business trip, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to hear. Where, Mary? And Lucy? He asked, noticing the eerie silence. The housekeeper hesitated, glancing toward Stacy, who sat smugly on the couch. Stacy crossed her arms. They're gone. Michael frowned. Gone? What do you mean? I kicked them out, she said nonchalantly. They didn't belong here anyway. The words sent a sharp pang through Michael's chest. His mind replayed Rose's warnings, the arguments they had, the way she had tried to tell him that Stacy was spiraling out of control. And yet, he had dismissed it all. He had failed Rose. Anger flared in his eyes as he stormed toward his daughter. Do you have any idea what you've done? His voice was dangerously low. Stacy flinched. She had never seen her father this angry before. Your mother fought for them, he continued. She wanted you to learn kindness, to understand that wealth doesn't make you better than others. He took a deep breath, his voice breaking. And now she's gone, Stacy. And you've dishonored everything she stood for. The weight of his words crashed down on her. For the first time, Stacy felt something unfamiliar, shame. She looked away, her confidence faltering. I didn't think it was that serious. Michael shook his head. You need to make this right. The next morning, Michael took Stacy to the school where Mary now worked. He didn't tell her what to do. He wanted her to come to the realization herself. When they arrived, they found Mary in the office, typing on a computer. Lucy was outside playing with some students. Stacy hesitated. She had never apologized to anyone before, let alone someone she had tormented. Mary looked up, surprised to see them. Michael nudged his daughter forward. Stacy swallowed hard. I'm sorry. The words felt foreign on her tongue. Mary raised an eyebrow. For what? For everything, Stacy said, her voice softer now. For being cruel to you and Lucy, for throwing you out, for not listening to my mom." Mary studied her for a moment, then sighed. "People can change, Stacy, but an apology is just words until your actions prove it." "I know," Stacy admitted. "I want to do better." Just then, Lucy walked in, freezing when she saw Stacy. Stacy took a deep breath. "Lucy, I treated you horribly, but I want to change. Can we start over?" Lucy hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Only if you mean it." A small smile played on Stacy's lips. "I do." Michael watched his daughter, hope flickering in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, Rose's dream of kindness wasn't lost after all. The days that followed were different, quiet, but healing. Stacy, once consumed by arrogance, now walked the path of humility. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but little by little, she made an effort to make amends. She visited Mary at work, helping with small tasks whenever she could. She stopped throwing around insults and instead started listening. Most importantly, she began treating Lucy as more than just an outsider. One afternoon, Stacy found Lucy reading under a tree at school. Taking a deep breath, she sat beside her. "What are you reading?" she asked. Lucy glanced up, cautious. "A novel about two best friends." Stacy shifted uncomfortably. "Sounds nice." Lucy closed the book. "You know, we could be friends, if you want." Stacy hesitated, but then, for the first time in a long while, she smiled. "I'd like that." Meanwhile, Mary's life had transformed. She was no longer scavenging for plastic bottles, no longer worrying about where they would sleep at night. Her job at the school provided stability, and with Michael's support, she and Lucy had a place to call home. Michael, determined to honor Rose's legacy, made sure Lucy had everything she needed to thrive. Though nothing could bring back his wife, he found solace in knowing that her kindness had left a lasting impact. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael sat on the porch, watching Stacy and Lucy talk and laugh in the yard. It was a sight he never imagined seeing. Maybe Rose was gone, but her dream of kindness had finally taken root, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right.